Hey everyone!
Welcome.
Okay. Hey everyone! Welcome to the Queerie. So today we're joined by a very special guest. So we have Erika. They are a queer game developer, and we're very excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. We have questions for you that we want to ask. First one, we just want to know a bit about you. Do you want to tell everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Erika Verkaaik. My pronouns are they, them. And I make video games sort of in my spare time. And I've been doing that for a while. I also run a games community and meetup, like a local games meetup called Squiggly River. I've done other things around the place, mostly focused around games. And at the moment, I've just started my master's, so I'm doing some research into alternative video game creators.
Amazing. That is so cool.
Thank you. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it is interesting. What's your actual master's title?
Well, that is still a work in process.
Yeah,
I've just started this year, so that's a really stressful question.
Yeah, well, sorry.
Sorry.
You're like, I don't know.
No, so in general, I'm looking at how do alternative, informal video game creators navigate the really precarious labor of that sort of creative work, and then how does that affect their practice. So I'm going to be doing interviews with game developers is the idea, and then getting some conclusions from that.
That's awesome.
It should be very fun. I'm really excited.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right, well, we're just going to ask some questions, get to know you, and I think this is an interesting topic to talk about. I don't know if many people know about the big queer scene with game development and that sort of area.
I
definitely didn't.
I definitely don't. So I'm really excited to learn.
I didn't either.
Oh, well,
that's the whole thing. Yeah.
And then you found it.
And then I found it.
Yeah. How did you get into the games industry to start with?
Yeah, so I had and I'm sure this is probably similar with anyone who's in games, I had a very roundabout way of getting into games to begin with. It's just because it's one of those things that you don't, if you're a kid, you don't think that you could make a video game. It doesn't seem like a real job, if that makes sense.
It's just fun.
Yeah, it's just they exist on my computer. No one actually did labor for this thing. So yeah, as a kid, I really didn't play many games. I was one of those families where my parents were you do not play games, go outside, sort of thing. I don't know if the same.
Yes,
yeah.
I just played Sims for hours on weekend.
Yeah, I had Sims 1, and that was one of the only games we had, and definitely played that as much as I could. But yeah,
I was the same. I had The Sims, and I had a PlayStation 2. But it was my older sister, so I very rarely used it.
That was my brother, yeah.
But we had Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. And I feel that's the only game I remember having.
Why do I just got random memories from my childhood?
Yeah.
That's actually, you literally just reminded me. Yeah, so we did not have a console in my house, but we had a computer that had Sims 1, Myst, and the Discworld DOS game, which is no one's heard of.
No.
So fine. But I was the kid that was always at after school care, and they had a PlayStation and they had Tony Hawk. Nice. And oh my God, we would have to write our names on a little chalkboard.
I play for 10 minutes.
You could only play for 10 minutes, and that was a whole thing. And now I'm see, there's a reason I went into games, because that was such a good memory. Tony Hawk's great.
Yes.
So I didn't play games as a kid, and then during high school I sort of again, I didn't have a console, but I was getting into Flash games. Were you playing games in your browser or something?
Cool math games and stuff.
Yeah, cool math games, which still exist.
And you had to click off it when the teacher came past in your computer lab.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of got really into those, which now that I look back at it again, there was some really weird alternative little games, maybe one person as well. So it makes sense where I kind of am. But yeah, sort of went through basic school, not really thinking that this was a viable thing. And I was I just like games. And then when I graduated high school, and I went into chemical engineering.
That's so cool.
And I hated it. It was super boring, but the people were awful. Engineering is just dude bros.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, we were having this discussion the other day, because my degree is it was very half business, half creative. And I was saying that all of my friends from uni have come from my creative industry subjects, because I struggled so much to speak to anybody in my business subjects, because they are all so up their own ass. They just didn't relax. Where it's you walked into a creative subject and everyone was hey, what's going on? Whatever.
Yeah, completely different atmosphere.
We have to do this group assignment, so let's get coffee or whatever. But in business, it was I never saw any of them, and it was all divvied up, and we Zoomed or whatever. it's so weird. It's so weird. It's so different.
I like think, I feel like the culture of your like classroom or a subject that you're doing or whatever you're doing, it makes a massive impact. And that's totally,
even if you like love the subject, if you're
love
with people
chemistry.
that,
I could have totally done that, but I was like, I hate
you have
these
to
people.
like the workplace and the people that you're going to be surrounded by.
Or you're just
otherwise.
fans of it. Yeah, and then that was actually at the point. So to bring it back to podcasts, make it relevant to your podcast.
For that segue.
My friend got me into podcasts when I was like in high school, like really early high school. So I've been listening to like podcasts forever, and they've had like a massive impact on my life. And just like because I was starting chemical engineering, it was super boring, and I was catching the bus all the time. I started like downloading a whole bunch of like games focused podcasts, just because I was like, I don't have time to play games, but maybe I could like listen to people talk about them.
Is it people talking about it or like playing it or
talking about it? So just people like who were like, at the time it was again like podcasts were even more casual, so it was just like, you know, people were literally just like, I played this game, and then chatting about random stuff. And through that it was just kind of, I was like, I've got more and more interested. The podcast I was listening to, that they're particularly talking about like more independent alternative games, which was exactly where my sort of interest lies. And then they, during that year, which if you look it up you can work out how old I am, so please don't do that. During that year, Gone Home came out, and that had a major impact on me. So have you heard about the game Gone Home?
No.
Cool. So it came out in 2013. So you can work out when I graduated. But it is basically, you walk around an empty house. The idea is that you're an older sister. You've come home from like a trip. Your family was meant to like pick you up from the airport, or they were at least meant to be there. But you get home and the house is completely empty. There's a note saying that someone will be back, or that there's a note basically at the beginning.
I have so much anxiety.
And also
it's
sounds
not
familiar to me.
Actually scary.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I think that's kind of like maybe a little familiar to some like current games as well. But you just walk around your house, and essentially you kind of play detective, and you piece together all the information, and you work out that your little sister has gotten into a relationship with a woman and then run away. So with like a girl, I can't remember the ages of them. But it was really important like to me and a whole bunch of other people at the time, right? Like, so Gone Home was this massive indie success, and it showed me like two things. One, I was like, I might be bi. I definitely am bi. And then also it was like, people can make video games, because it was this thing of the story was like, you know, a couple of people made this, and I was like, holy shit, that's what I want to do. Like, I want to make games. And it's nice looking back to be like, it was also queer. Like, it all comes together.
So cool.
So from there, I still didn't really think about going into games directly, but I was really into illustration and art at the time. So I ended up starting an animation degree, which again, I was like, this is kind of boring. I really like art and all of that, but animation, the act of animation, is extremely tedious.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Have you done something?
I haven't done it, but I can't remember where I learned about it. I think in one of my classes they talked about Disney animation. Were you guys in that class?
Oh, it sounds familiar.
And they just talked about how it was like very much
every
like,
little hair, and
it was like a what's that thing called where it's like like in a factory, like and like everyone, what's that thing? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Like a thingy line, assembly line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. It's like an assembly line of like one part, and then you've got to like put the other part
Someone
over.
Someone will keyframe it, do the in-betweens, go to the painting.
The
Yeah.
We
should have just asked you.
I've got an animation degree, you know, that I do not use. So I'm glad that I can use literally like one piece of knowledge from it.
Yeah, nice. You have to use something.
But yeah, so the college that I was studying at, animation worked really closely with games, and that was my actual in. I kind of just moved sideways into games. I'd finished my animation degree, but by the end I was like mostly fully interested in doing games. Because I really like creating worlds, which is what I wanted to originally do with animation, but I was like, this is so slow. And games was a quicker way to do that. So yeah, I sort of like finished up my animation degree, and at that time, Brendan Keogh, friend of the show.
Yes. Hello, Brendan. Friend of the pod.
Does he watch this?
Oh, better.
Okay, great. Hi, Brendan. Yeah, so at that time, Brendan was just starting to run this really casual little games meetup called Squiggly River. And there were other meetups running in Brisbane, and there still are other meetups running in Brisbane, like Big Dev and Game Development Brisbane. But they were a lot more networking focused and really corporate focused.
Okay.
So they just weren't the sort of thing that I was looking for when I was going to them, because I wanted more like talk about the creative process or just chat about games and game
more
development
casual almost.
in general.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of like Squiggly River had like a massive impact on, you know, making me feel a lot more confident in my game development. Getting to talk to people as well was like a major thing. Just being able to talk to other locals doing game development. And it sort of like snowballed from there.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about Squiggly River?
Yeah.
And sort of like what exactly a game meetup is, because I'm so clueless.
Yeah, we're like, cool, game meetup.
Right, okay,
Tell
absolutely.
us more.
So Squiggly River is like, it's a casual local game development meetup in Brisbane. Our official tagline is a place for games, playful art things, and the people who make and play them. So we tried to make it, so Brendan came up with that tagline, I believe. I was not involved with organising Squiggly at that time.
Yeah.
But
How long has it been around for?
Oh, it's been around since 2017, I believe.
Wow.
Yes, yeah.
It's a while.
So
awesome.
It's a while, but it's also like pretty new, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah. I feel like it's, you know, it's just started, but it really has taken, like any sort of like community thing, it took a while to build up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, have people
absolutely.
join and get a community. Yeah.
Yeah, and so in terms of like what a meetup is, literally we just book out a location. At the moment we're meeting up at the library. We've got like a little room in the library. We meet up. People usually like come along and hang out. They might like bring a laptop, or if they're making a board game or something, they'll bring that along.
Okay, so it's not like just like traditional. I don't know if that's traditional gaming, but like video gaming. Is
Yeah,
what I think. But
Absolutely. We've tried to like keep it really open, and yeah, that's why we're like playful art things and the people who make and play them.
right. So like
That's really
everyone-
cool.
And we often have, you know, we've gained like members or like attendees, I guess, because people will walk past us at the library and be like, this is cool, what's this? And we'll explain what it is, and they'll be like, oh, I actually do audio. And then they'll like come from that point, and yeah, they'll make audio for games or something
That's
like
so
that.
cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. We've met like a lot of interesting people, I guess, mostly because we've tried to keep it a lot more casual and open than maybe some of the than how like some of the other meetups sort of like
They're a bit more
market
structured.
themselves,
Yeah.
structure
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, I feel like if you were maybe like really new to it and you didn't like maybe know if you were going the right direction. If you're
Yeah.
going to something more casual, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, nothing's going to happen. You don't have to like
Yeah.
go in being like, I'm a professional, I have a degree or anything.
That's it. And I literally like everywhere, every time we like post our meetup details, we're like, it's extremely chill, it's extremely casual, come and hang out. You don't have to
That's
show anything
awesome.
or do anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've just tried to make it like super, super welcoming for everyone. And we've got like a really diverse community because of that as well. So yeah, that started in 2017. I sort of started helping with organization in like 2018. Mostly we love Brendan, but he's not great at the social media, and I was like, I can do this because I used to do that for my job. So I just started taking that over and just getting us a bit of more of a online presence, and then we eventually set up a Discord community.
Oh yeah.
Do you know Discord?
We know Discord.
You know
Do you
Discord.
want to know
Brendan.
how we know Discord?
Because I convinced Brendan. He's like, you have converted me, and he told me he was using it for his class.
Yeah.
Cool.
I never used it before then, but you know,
Cool.
good to have another.
I
thing that we
actually
know.
did because I was I read this book called Women Don't Owe You Pretty. You should read it.
You told me about that.
It's like very foundational level of like feminism type book. And the person that wrote it was trying to like foster this online community of like queer women meeting up in different cities and stuff. As I think she's from the UK. So there was like, she posts a photo, and then in her comment section it's like, find your people, like find people near you. And there was this massive like Discord thing with like all these different threads, groups. I don't really know fully how it works, but I was in one of those where it was like book meetup and like cafe meetup, like all these different things, and it was really fun.
That's awesome.
That's
Why
awesome.
is Discord like? Is that just like the best one to use, would you say?
So
That
Discord
sort of
is like super similar to Slack, like in terms of what it is. And I believe, oh my God, don't quote me, but I believe that Discord came after Slack as well.
Right, okay.
Discord from the get-go was like for fostering online communities, and it was really framed originally to be like, I think it was like, you know, hang out with your friends and play video games. It was very video game focused, and it was kind of bad because of that. Like when you loaded Discord, it would like say like stupid gamer memes and stuff like that.
And so if you're not really in that,
it was kind of like intimidating. But they've gotten rid of a lot of that, and now it's just like, I think it's because it's very accessible. You can like download it, you can set up a massive server and use all these tools for free. So it's just like really, it's useful, I guess. Yeah.
So it helps with the including everyone in it.
Yeah, and it allows you to have multiple, for anyone who doesn't know Discord, it allows you to have multiple channels, so you can have whole different like topics of discussion. So the Squiggly River one, which you can find on our website, you can join it, please do if you're interested. We've got channels, you know, for like showing off your work or recommending games. We also just added the art game club, kind of like a book club, but for games.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. So again, we're trying to make it like, you know, if you're interested in these sort of alternative types of games, but you don't make them yourself, we'll come along and we'll chat about a game, and you can like play it and then have a discussion at the meetups as well.
Awesome.
So
Yeah,
cool.
we're just trying to add more things.
Yeah. So do you think that it's really important to have like that inclusive community in the video game industry?
Oh, absolutely. So the games industry is not typically very welcoming to anyone who isn't like a cis het straight white
Yeah, it's quite
dude guy.
stereotypical.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's typically been very, for a whole bunch of reasons. There is stacks of research on this if you want to get really invested. But honestly, like the marketing in the 80s and like 90s till to current day has been very focused on like positioning video games as like, video games are silly boys for like silly toys for teenage boys. I fucked that up immediately.
Well, I think even if you didn't do like in-depth research, like it's just so...
It's pretty obvious.
Like, anyone would just be like, oh yeah, that's like for white straight men, like video games, you know? I don't think a lot of the time people think about it in a differing way.
And it's that thing of like, if that's all you see, then you go, which is exactly what happened to me. I was like, oh, I'm really interested in games, but of course I could never get a job in that. Let me do something a lot more useful, like animation. There's tons of jobs in animation. There is not. But it's a lie. But it was like a little bit more welcoming, you know, just in the community and how it was sort of facing there as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like massively important. We've kind of like made it a bit of our, like it's part of our, we don't have a mission statement, we have a manifesto, and it's part of our manifesto that we're like hyper inclusive. So yeah, we try to do things differently from the other meetups, not to compete with them in any way, but to be like, to have differences there. So you can go to all of them if you want, all of the Brisbane ones, there's stacks. But we purposely put our meetups, we make them during the day. We don't make it a drinking event. We try to make it like at a library where you can like bring a laptop and easily show things off. Mostly because the games industry has a bit of a issue with only having meetups at really like a bar, or you know, it's somewhere where drinking is going to be encouraged, and then with the demographic who is maybe mostly there, it makes it very unwelcoming if you're not cishet dude.
And also probably a bit like scary for people to want to go along when it already is intimidating.
Absolutely. I think like unfortunately, like most creative industries, there are like ongoing stories of abuse and issues like that within the games industry. And even at like a local meetup, you might just be like worried about that, especially if you're a newcomer or if you just generally don't feel safe in that sort of space.
So would you say that there's a difference in the type of games that queer developers produce in comparison to, you know, like the stereotypical straight cis man that we were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and this is probably again applicable to all creative industries as well. When you have people who are sort of like they're part of the mainstream, right? Like, and for games, that's being a cishet straight white dude. You might, you feel comfortable in that, you know that games are sort of like built for you. So you're kind of more likely just keep replicating what the mainstream is putting out, which is probably like shooty games, right?
Amazing.
First
Well,
person
there's so
shooter
many of them,
games,
so
so many
obviously
of
that's
them.
happened.
Absolutely, and it just sort of like, it's kind of like it just keeps repeating itself. But I think, and obviously this is not the case across the board. I'm sure there's tons of queer people who are also working on like Call of Duty.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about like independent developers, I think if you're already a queer person in games, you're already, you know, part of the like minority there. You already feel like you're maybe a bit on the outside. So you feel a bit more comfortable with just like breaking other rules, right? You're already breaking the rules for being in games.
Yeah.
So you're like, fuck it. It doesn't need to be a first person shooter. It can be whatever I want.
Yeah.
And we see a lot more diversity in the game design and the types of games being made when you have different creators behind it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like queer game developers, they might like make more personal games, but games about more maybe like mundane experiences, but also doing really experimental stuff. And you know, being a queer game developer doesn't necessarily mean that like you're making a game with characters where all the characters are queer. You might make a game with like no characters at all. Super experimental. It's something like out there. Absolutely.
Well, even we were talking about Unpacking, like that sort of game.
Perfect.
Just there's no character really, is there? Like,
I mean, there
or the
kind
person,
of is, but it's like hinted at.
Yeah.
Like it's not explicit. Like
you're
where you are
the
this
character.
person. It's kind of like you piece together based on what's in the boxes that there is a character, and this is how their life has gone.
Absolutely. And I think like if you only assume that the only people who will like play video games at all are going to be like straight teenage dudes, then you're probably going to think like, oh, a game where you organize a room, that's not, you know, the audience of games isn't going to enjoy that. But when you're a queer creator or a different creator, you might go, actually, I know that there's an audience for this because that's what I would want to play. So you're making the games that you would want to play, which might be different.
That's cool. And what was the like reception like to that? Like, because I know for so long it's been like that really stereotypical like shooting games and that sort of environment. So when did this like queer development of games come out, and what was it like? In
so
society?
I think like there's always been people making really alternative and super indie games. Sort of like the original history of games was only people working, you know, by themselves on a computer, and it's only when you have big companies who started to make it like a more formal industry can you have people like having a difference there, I guess. If you have people making games in their bedroom as sort of like the original start of the industry, then that only becomes weird or different when you have big companies try to take over the industry, right? So of course you have people making, you know, interesting queer experiences, and the reception, I guess like the reception from the mainstream is getting better. But games is still very exclusive. Like the games industry, the mainstream games industry, and like, you know, if you go to a local community meetup, that's going to be way better than what you see online, but it's still very exclusionary. Like I feel like games is like further behind than other creative media. Like when if a big company game puts out a game that has a protagonist who's a woman, there'll be people complaining about that online. Like we haven't even got to the point where we have like queer protagonists in AAA games. Like those are our mainstream games, we call them AAA.
The thing changes. That is because games have been like so traditionally marketed as like, these are for boys do these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like where you have that sort of who they're marketed towards, so that becomes the main audience, and then they also feel protective of it, right?
Because they don't want it to change.
So then when you have games, more girl games being made, or you're having games, you know, made with queer characters or just like women characters, they're going, oh, but these are my video games. It also has like, games unfortunately has that sort of like holdover of like nerd culture as well, where this is also the same in like other fandoms and other creative industries, but because these, again, typically cishet white young men feel like they've been persecuted for their interests in video games or nerd culture, then when other people start coming in, they're like, no, this is the only thing I have. And they get quite defensive, and that sort of like creates a ton of tensions there.
Really toxic sort of,
because they feel like, you know, what they consider normal within the industry is being like attacked, and maybe like, well, maybe there won't be so many shooter games. There will 100%.
And I mean,
there's enough,
you can still
like,
have your thing that's yours without having to stop other people from doing it. You don't have to play
Yeah,
the games.
it's that sort of like saying or meme, I guess, of like equality feels like an attack when you're only used to holding the majority. When you're used to privilege and you have to share it, you're like, oh,
I can't do that.
oh yeah, I'm losing something here. And that's definitely been like the reception. So I mentioned like Gone Home was a massively important game for me to get into the industry. And part of that as well was at the time when it came out, it caused this massive debate because people were like, that's not a video game. All you're doing is walking and picking up items and looking at them and like maybe reading notes. That's not a video game. Right. So it sparked this like whole thing of like, what is a game?
Yeah, but what is a game?
What is a game? Like, and for me that was really interesting, and I was like, oh, but that's the sort of thing I'm interested in creating. And like I could make something like that. But that was also the issue, because all these dude bros go, oh, but anybody could make that, and if anyone can make it, then that's
anybody
not,
can make anything.
Exactly.
I can go out and be like, I'm gonna be a singer. Well, doesn't mean that I have the talent or the ability to do so.
But that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, it's weird that in the games industry it's so like, oh, you can't do that, it's not real. It's like, well, what about like music? There's so many different genres. You wouldn't say just because you like rock music that like pop music isn't real music, or like films, like just because you like romance
I'd argue
music.
that people do say that.
Well, yeah, I guess that's true, but it's not. I don't know if it's as like aggressive as what I've
it's still
seen in the games
coming
industry.
from that same point, and maybe like within like, oh my god, I don't know anything about music. I was like, maybe within subcultures, like if you're really into like a particular type of metal, and then someone was making like a newer type of that metal, they'd be like, oh, that's not real. That's not real. Blah blah blah.
But I do feel like, from what I've seen, which isn't a lot, but from a very outsider perspective of games, like it seems much more toxic and like it's aggressive for people to do different things. And like you say, the people need to protect it.
And I think like games typically as well have been a very solo activity. So it's a thing that, you know, like if you have no friends, maybe for whatever reason, you can still play games alone, and maybe that's created maybe that like isolation has created a really toxic sort of culture, because again, people feel very like protective of it.
There's a lot to it. Wow.
Yeah, it's a very like toxic industry. Yeah. But again, that's why like
you're changing it by doing these sorts of things.
And I think that's why having an inclusive community like Squiggly River is super important, because we are trying to like cut through that toxicity and create like a way more inclusive and even just like a more casual space. We've had people rock up who are like, oh, they're a programmer, and they're like, oh, maybe I'm interested in video games. I know how to program, but I don't know anything about games. And we're like, cool, come and join us.
Come and see if you do.
We'll talk to you. We'll give you some pointers, some tutorials. And that's what we sort of like aim to be.
So we were chatting with Brendan, who works at Squiggly River alongside you, and he was telling us about the surprising amount of like queer people who are in that space in the game development industry. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like Squiggly River in particular is quite queer compared to maybe, again, some of the other games meetups, and I think that's mostly because we've sort of fostered and we've aimed to sort of foster that inclusivity. We're a lot more casual, so it's a little bit more easy than going to maybe one of the other more networking focused ones. And then just in general, there are actually a lot of queer and particularly like trans creators in game development. I think like,
why do you think that is?
I think games are a really good way to sort of explore your identity. And if you're like a young queer kid and you're like questioning yourself, it's a very safe way for you to like try out different identities. Of course, like you could, you know, even back ages ago, like in the original like Pokemon games or whatever, it'd be like, are you a boy or a girl? So you could, you know, maybe like try on something different for yourself, even just in like that way. And it's very safe, right? Like you can do that, you know, on your Game Boy or in the safety of your home. We were talking about Sims 1, or we were talking about Sims earlier, and like even Sims 1, you could like get into relationships with people of the same gender, which I know that I definitely did as a kid without like realizing what I was doing. I was very repressed. You too. And it's that sort of thing of like, again, you can like play with identity. So I think games like sort of foster, or it's like an interesting way to sort of explore your identity.
Yeah, it actually seems like the perfect way to be able to explore it.
It's so interesting because like I identify as a woman, and I've never like felt the need to explore that because I'm pretty sure of that. So I've never needed to like click the boy option of a game, but like that makes so much sense that people would do that, and like that is a safe place for them to be like, oh, perhaps I do this. That's so cool.
So you can't just do in real life.
In real
Without,
life,
like,
yeah.
without repercussion of like
being
like seen in public.
Yeah.
I guess if that's like not, I don't know, you have a safety net when you're on the computer.
And I think like video games as well have been very, they've you know, more recently they've been very like online. And, you know, if you are playing a video game, you might be going on to like an online community or talking about it on some sort of like discussion board or like in a Discord server. Yeah. And those are all places that you can, you know, unless someone who knows you in real life knows that account, you can be someone completely different. I know that when I was like younger, I would just like be kind of like anonymous, right? Like I wouldn't have any information about myself. And that means you know, you can sort of break away from maybe what, I don't know, your gender that was assigned at birth was, or try out different names or any of that stuff. And you can be sort of like, the internet, although horrible, can be an interesting way to explore that sort of identity, and games sort of fits really nicely alongside that. I know Sims was like, massively important for me. Like that was, it was so, because you literally got to play and explore different types of relationships.
There you go. So it's kind of the beginning of you establishing like your own identity as well.
And then when you have like other games that are actually that like are explicitly queer, like something like Gone Home, that was pretty important for me as well, because again you got to explore the story of this person's like queer relationship or her little sister's queer relationship, so you're getting to sort of like experience this, and again in a very safe way, because games are kind of individual. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like watching a movie with your parents where you're like, you're getting that external force maybe of like, oh, this is not okay. You get to really explore it at your own pace. And I think another thing that sort of contributes to like why there's so many queer people at Squiggly, since I sort of took over or sort of started helping organize as well, we now have, you know, a non-binary person helping organize. It sort of establishes that this might actually be like a little bit more of a actual inclusive community. And we've done some other things as well. Like there was a point where we ran a game jam for Pride Month, and we had like the little rainbow flag in our Twitter handle for a while, and then we forgot to take it out. So I think it just stuck, and there was definitely people who kind of like assumed, oh, Squiggly River is only for queer people, which is not the case. We have it open for everybody, but it's definitely sort of helped foster that culture and the amount of people there. Just other things as well, like I know that we've had quite a few people sort of come out after being at Squiggly, which is another reason we have kept it really open. Like especially people coming out like as trans as well. Like I think, you know, if you're only allowed to be in an exclusively queer space, once you're out, it can be a bit tricky. And maybe people who are in the closet or questioning, or they don't even know it themselves, they, you know, being in a space where they're allowed to interact with people who are actually trans and out, it's so helpful, and they'll actually sort of like, it actually helps foster that as well. And
that's
I think,
really cool.
I think word of mouth has also been the other big thing. Like we've had, you know, you have one person show up and then they tell all their friends. I think we're pretty used to rainbow washing at this point, where like every company or everything is going to advertise, we're totally safe, we're totally inclusive, but it might not actually be the case. If, you know, you're actually going to Squiggly River and you're like, oh no, this is fine, then you tell your friends, and it sort of like snowballs from there.
Of course,
just because the queer community is so good at sort of like helping each other out and fostering that community.
You want to help other people that you're friends with outside, be like, oh, come along, like, you know, join another, even if they weren't even, like you said, even really into video games that much, just being with like-minded people.
Definitely. And we have that all the time. People will literally show up where they're like, oh, I'm kind of interested in games anyway, I bought my friend for moral support, and the friend will be like, I draw sometimes, and we're like, oh, let me see your art. So we keep it super casual, and it's really nice to see the community grow, because there was definitely a point in time where like sometimes literally no one would show up. Literally it would just like be me there as the only person, or like one other person. But we're getting like a pretty steady amount of people.
How many people do you get now?
Probably like 15 to 20 people every meetup. We meet up once a month, but also our Discord community is massively growing, and there's definitely people who are like, I really want to come to meetups, but like they're like really far north in Queensland, or they just Saturdays don't work for them or whatever. And we're trying to do more events as well. So to sort of like mix it up, and it's not just, we usually meet up on like every second Saturday of the month, which just doesn't work for everyone.
That's so cool. I just love this whole idea of like like a I don't know, like a casual meetup. Like I don't know, it just sounds so cool.
Yeah, Brennan and I have talked about this a ton, but if you're like, oh, I really wish there was like a community like this in Brisbane. I think in particular being in Brisbane, you have this idea of like, oh, it's fucking Brisbane, you know, like
it's not Melbourne,
it's not
Sydney,
Melbourne,
really
whatever.
cultural.
Yeah, and which was one of the reasons that Brennan actually started it in the beginning, because Melbourne games scene has some really cool indie stuff, and he was like, why isn't there anything like that in Brisbane? And he was like, we just need to start it. That's it. Yeah. And all community stuff just like takes a while. You just need someone to be like, fuck it, I've made a Twitter account and a Discord group, and I'm just going to regularly post it every month. And then you just have one person show up and they tell their friends, and it snowballs from there.
So how did you and Brendan meet? So did you go to Squiggly River?
Yeah, so
it kind of like grew that you
from there,
came on board.
and I was like, I know how to do social media. Can I please be in charge of the Facebook group that you don't touch?
Awesome.
Yeah, and sort of just like took it from there and developed the Discord.
So you spoke about being non-binary. So can you like delve further into that, like your gender identity, like you personally?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been out for. It was a sort of thing like, I don't know about. You're younger than me, so like not making eye contact. I don't know about you, but like I didn't even hear about non-binary. Like I didn't know that was a thing until like 2018. I hadn't even like heard the word before. So to me it was like brand new, but it was this thing where I was like, always felt like, I don't know, always felt a little bit weird, especially with like being called a woman. That was like a big thing. I was like, oh, I hate it. Like I hate it. I was like, oh, it's just the way that men say it in a shitty way. It's just that. No. So yeah, like in 2018, I think I started to see, probably like 2017, I started to see people like talking about being non-binary online a lot more, just like through Twitter and maybe YouTube maybe. So I started seeing it and be like, oh, what is this? And then literally doing my own research. And yeah, so being non-binary, it's a really big umbrella term. It's basically like if you don't exclusively or entirely identify as either a woman or a man, that might be like you're somewhere in between, you're not even on a spectrum at all, you might have no gender, that might be being gender fluid. So there's a whole bunch of other smaller terms. I'm not an expert, I'm just talking for myself as well. There's a whole bunch of other terms underneath that, and it's sort of like this big umbrella. And as soon as I found it, I was like, oh my god, that's it, that's like the missing link. And it was definitely something that like, which is probably like a lot of queer people's experience, when you work out a part of your identity, or you go, oh, maybe it's like that, you then like look back at your life and you're like, oh no, it makes sense. So yeah, we were talking earlier about like games being a great like way to sort of explore your identity. And I know that when I was starting to get really interested in games and just like art in general, like online, I was just like a screen name. I didn't have anything associated with me, and I really liked that. And I was like, oh, I just like being anonymous. I can be whatever I want. But it's also like, oh, no one was assuming anything about me. You know, people didn't know whether I was a man or a woman or whatever. Yeah. And that was really like comforting. And now I'm like, I know why it was comforting. Oh, damn. Yeah. But yeah, so like I was starting to like, oh, this is really interesting, starting to do a ton of research. But it was that thing of like, I definitely didn't know anyone who was non-binary in real life, which makes it hard when you're like, oh, is this like just some internet thing? Yeah. Which is definitely like still a shitty perception that I guess people
like
have.
A stereotype, people are like,
what
is this?
Oh, this is a fake thing. It's like, oh, it's been around forever, so whatever.
It's just the internet is the thing that, you know, it lets people know about it.
Yeah, brings people together
and I guess
well.
People take that as, oh, it's just this like trend, but
it's
bringing awareness, and then more people do it because they're aware of it that they weren't before.
And I think like definitely now we're seeing a lot of like conservative panic around trans people, especially trans children is a whole thing. And they're like, oh my god, there's so many trans children, like what's happening, they're influencing the kids. It's like, no, they're just learning about it. Like it's that thing open, there's like amazing. There's a graph of like left-handed people, and it shows like the number of left-handed people shot up sharply
after they weren't forced to be right-handed.
After they weren't beaten in school if they were using their left hand, and then it plateaued out, which was like, oh, this is just the natural amount of left-handed people. And I swear it's the exact same thing, right? Like this is just like, here's the actual natural amount of like trans people or whatever.
Like it goes with everything though, like trans people or people on the spectrum and like people with mental illness, like all of those things.
Yeah,
People
mental
like,
illness is a massive
everyone
one.
has a mental illness these days, or are we just more aware that these things
exist
because they
weren't talked about.
about.
Yeah, and again, you were like in trouble for feeling a certain type of way or acting a certain type of way, where like you just had to learn how to mask or like whatever that is.
Even like those old studies on like, this is how many queer people are in the population. Those studies were done when like it was still literally like outlawed in some places, right?
Yeah,
so
no
like,
one's going to go out and say.
which means that even I think it was like 10% or something back then.
Right.
It was like that 10% is of people who were willing to talk about it when it wasn't okay to talk about it.
Yeah.
Imagine what it would be like now.
Yeah.
And I swear it's like just that sort of thing. But yeah, so like my big like turning point. Oh, so yeah, I guess like otherwise I'm bi, and I came out basically literally the second I left high school. Like I worked it out.
Right.
I was very repressed. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. So, you know,
I feel like that is like such
really good at like lying to myself clearly.
We talked about that in like I think our first episode, like a lot of people who don't come out earlier.
Yeah.
Because, if you're repressed to think a certain way and be around those sorts of people.
Very late in life. I mean, late in life, I'm 23. But like I think, when did I come out to myself? I was like 20, I think. But I think it just comes from like, a religious background of like, I didn't know, first of all, didn't know it existed. And then also just thought it wasn't okay.
Same, absolutely. Yeah, like the second I left high school, I was like, oh, I think I'm bi. And then again, like online, just in like asking. Literally, I just started watching that show Heartstoppers. Have you seen that show?
No.
Oh, it's really cute.
Wait, is that the one that just came out?
Literally just came out.
I've been seeing clips of it.
It's got like trans characters. It's very good.
It's
like the opposite.
Actors.
It's like the antithesis to Euphoria. Euphoria is fine and great, but it's also like very like depressing.
Yeah, it's depressing.
It is very depressing. Whereas Heartstoppers is really, it's just very sweet.
I saw a clip, the arcade clip, and it was really.
Oh, I don't think I'm up for that.
Oh,
but
shit,
anyway, one of the characters is like, "Am I gay?" into Google, and I was like, "No." I remember doing those quiz.
Yes.
Literally, like the first answer should be like, "Did you search this quiz up? This is your answer." yes. Yeah, like I knew I was bi for like quite a bit longer than being trans as well, like, and being trans non-binary, but like the way that I worked this out mentally was just so stupid. Like I wish it was the sort of thing I wish there was more representation when I was a kid, because I'd be like, oh, I wouldn't have had to wait till I was 23 to work out I was non-binary. But basically like all through high school I was like, I'm a massive ally for the queer community. I'm a massive ally. I'm really supportive. And then the second I left I was like, oh no, actually I'm just bi. I'm just in it. And then after that, I was like, I'm a massive ally to the trans community. I'm a massive ally, totally. And then I literally, to myself, I was like, do I think I'm an ally in the same way that I was an ally to the queer community? And I was like, oh yeah, glass shatter. Like, oh, I'm allowed to be. Yeah. The other thing, which again links back to games, and like queerness is weirdly connected for me a lot. So I guess it's relevant. I went to a like game jam, symposium. And there were just like a whole bunch of
queer... What
queer...
do any of those things mean?
So
symposium.
A game jam. Game jams are really interesting. It's essentially you get given a theme or a topic and you have a short amount of time to make a game. So it's literally like the theme for that was like love, sex and romance. So it was like you have a weekend to make a game about love, sex and romance.
I freaking love that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah, so it was really cool. I made some cool things there. I made a little like 2-player game about like consent, where you end up with like a little craft project by the end of it. It's pretty cool. Basically it was held at Byron Bay. It was super hot. All the computers, like no one's computer could work. It was like 40 degrees or something. So everyone was like kind of forced to make board games or like analog games. It was really interesting. It was very cool. But yeah, like it was the first time I'd ever met like anyone who was non-binary like in person, and there was a whole bunch of people. So I just got to talk to people more generally, and literally like on the drive home I was like, I'm non-binary. That's it. Yeah. And then it was a pretty quick turnaround from sort of working it out to coming out to my friends, much later for my family. But yeah.
But you know how cool, like that's so cool, because now you're doing Squiggly River and you just think like there's probably people just like you who are coming to your events who will go home and drive home and be like,
that's it.
I see. Like, and you just keep that cycle going.
Like a wholesome feeling.
Really, really cool.
To know that like you're making a difference.
Like,
Yeah, like
yeah.
how much it affected
Yeah.
you. It's
Yeah.
doing the exact same thing to, I'm sure, so
Probably.
many
Yeah.
people.
And like, yeah, like we definitely have like a whole bunch of trans people at Squiggly River meetups. Like I think genuinely at any point in time, we probably have like 40 or 50% of the group is probably trans. I'm bad at math. I hope that's, 40% maybe or on that side.
Yeah.
And definitely we've had people who, you know, have transitioned after coming to Squiggly, you know, like they've been part of the community for a while and then they make that transition. So I think like, having that space where you can just talk to other queer people is in person as well is so important.
Not just online, which is great, but being able to come in person and do it.
Just because like if it's online, you still get that disconnect, but in person is so important. Yeah.
Well, we have one more question for you that we are going to ask all of our guests, and that is, what makes you most proud to be queer? Big question.
I've been thinking about this. Yes, I also like didn't want to steal Coco's answer, which was like the community, but that was going to be mine as well. I think honestly, the thing I'm probably most proud of is how creative the community actually is, and that makes me so proud because like we're willing to, you know, create communities and create spaces for ourselves, but also like create art movements and stuff like that. I think we're so, because we talked about this earlier, but because we're already not, you know, in that mainstream, we're already outside of the box, we're already thinking outside the box. It sort of allows us to be a little bit more experimental, a little bit more creative, and that makes me so proud to see that and see that like in my friends who are creating things and when I get to make things as well.
Awesome.
I love that. That's such a good answer. I agree. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for coming on.
That's okay.
I think that was a really insightful.
So insightful. Like I fully came into this being like, I don't game. I've never
But
gamed in my life.
And cut to all the clips of us talking about games. I've also been playing The Sims again, though. Yeah, it's so good. Are you playing Sims 4? Yeah, I got it for free because it was like a sale at one point. It was like crazy. Yeah.
It's on sale at the moment. It was like 80% off or something. So it was like $5. And all of the expansions were like $10 each. And I was like, fuck. Don't tell me that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, like it's an ongoing issue with the games industry, but people, like games in general, people think, oh, well, like I'm not the stereotype, so therefore I don't play games, or games aren't for me, but games are for everybody. I was actually going to ask as well, do you mind if I shout out some queer games?
Yes, please. Plug everything.
Hold on, let's give you a plug.
So you can find all of my stuff just under my name. So I just use my full name online. So it's erikaverkaaik.com or on Twitter or whatever. Also my itch.io account is under Erika Verkaaik. So if you want to play some cool free indie games, the big website for that is called itch.io or itch.io. Just type it in like itch, like to scratch.io.
I'll be doing that after this.
Yeah. And I have some cool other queer games to recommend. So these are just some of my favorites. So we've talked a bit about Gone Home and Unpacking, which is a Brisbane game, but some other ones, and again, these ones are all free, so go check them out, is Hurt Me Plenty by Robert Yang. We have The Trans Zone by Glamour Research, Extreme Meat Punks Forever by Heather Flowers, Everything Is Going to Be Okay by Alien Melon, and That Boy Is a Monster by Sav Wolf. And those are some of my absolute favorites. And if you're like, queer games exist, check those ones out first. All free.
Check it out. I'm going to.
Yeah, I want to do that. What the heck? I'm so excited. Yay.
Are they just online, like on?
Yeah, so if you have a look on itch.io, you should be able to find those will all be up there. Yeah, and you just search for them. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can we do a little clean?
Yes. Let's do it. We got to do the... Okay, ready?
All right.